Welcome to Boat Building News, the podcast Achieving Excellence, a series of incredible conversations with some of the highest achievers from around the world. I'm excited. This is going to be epic. Welcome, Graham, to the Boat Building News podcast.
Thank you, Holly. It's great to be with you.
So I am super excited to talk about boats, recruitment, but the other thing I absolutely love to talk and learn about is leadership. So I've been looking forward to this conversation for so long.
Yeah, me too. It was great to meet you for the first time last year. And I'm really looking forward to today and following up some of the conversations we've had since then.
So Graham, give yourself a quick introduction. Who are you? What is it that you do?
Yeah, so my name is Graham Wakeman. I'm a partner at GiANT London, and we're a leadership development specialist that work with some of the most well-known and some of the biggest companies in the world, but also small and medium-sized companies as well. And really what we're about is about unlocking leadership potential, helping leaders get really healthy, build healthy leadership teams in their organization, and then create high-performing, healthy organizational cultures. And I absolutely love it. I love what I get to do.
Wow, that's quite a task you have. So, I mean, anyone can be a leader. You know, it's a job title. You know, you work through the ranks. You might get promoted to team leader. You might get promoted to, overall manager or whatever. But how do you define what a good leader is? What a healthy leader is?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Holly, and I want to keep it really simple. For me, leadership is about influence. It's about positive influence. And influence is how do you actually help the people that you have responsibility for to be the best version of themselves? How do you unlock them? How do you liberate them to be the best version of themselves? And that's what I call positive influence. So it's not just about the workplace. It's actually, we all have influence. We have influence over ourselves. We have influence over our families, our partners, over our kids or relationships, also over friends, into the workplace, out into the community. And now with the advent of Zoom and Teams calls, we have influence all over the world and through social media. So the question is, how are we using our influence? Are we using it for good? And if we are, I would say that's leadership.
So it's almost, instead of sort of leading through authority and telling somebody what to do, it's almost helping them to reach that decision themselves.
Yeah, I think, maybe historically we've seen leadership as a role or a title.
Yeah.
And if you can work your way up to a role or title, you're now a leader. Now, the problem with that is we tend to lead from a place of control or dominance or perhaps even fear. And those things suppress people rather than liberate or release or free people to be their best. But of course, when you're leading out of a place of insecurity yourself, then we tend not to want to release and unlock the people around us. So healthy leadership and influence is actually about being really secure in who we are ourselves. And we use this phrase, you've got to know yourself to lead yourself. So healthy leadership always starts with saying, well, who am I? Who am I at my best? What's my personality? What are my gifts, my skills, my superpowers? Where do I add the most value? Where can I bring influence to the people around me, which is me at my best, which unlocks them to be at their best? And when we're operating in that place, we're more fulfilled, we're happier, we're more impactful, and people want to follow us. And so a definition of a good leader is not simply someone who has the title or the role. A definition of a good leader is somebody who's worth following. Now, that's really challenging. Because if we ask ourselves, am I a leader worth following? Sometimes, if I'm honest, the answer in my life has been no. I was a leader that people had to follow because I had the title and the office and the position and the status. They had to follow me. But I actually want to be a leader who's worth following, that people say, wow, that person helps me be the best I can. They're building this organization, this company, this team. They're creating a healthy culture. I'm thriving in it, and I want to follow them, because actually they're unlocking something rather than suppressing something. So that's what brings me joy, to get to see that happen.
So, I mean, that's really interesting, because when you talk about, a leader worth following, I guess if you're a leader just in job title alone, you're constantly going to be looking over your shoulder, kind of dragging your team with you, trying to convince them, no, this is where we want to go, this is our end goal. And actually, if you ask them to be completely 100% honest, which I know that they aren't always are, but do they share that end goal? Do they share that vision? Are they as bought in as you think they are? I think you can be quite blinkered, can't you, in that I'm the leader, I'm the boss, I'm the manager, you must come with me. And I think there's probably quite a lot of value in stopping and thinking, why should they? Do they want to come with me?
Yeah. And also, you can lead in that way. That is a leadership style, that autocratic kind of leadership style. And in some places it can be effective. Mm-hmm. But really what we're trying to do is to create a place of what we call psychological safety. It's a term you may have heard of, but really it just means a culture of high trust. Right. And psychological safety means that everybody in the team feels that they can bring their best to the table without fear of punishment or shame or blame. And so when you think about our teams, how many of the people in our team actually feel free to bring their best to the table? Typically there's one person who's perhaps an extrovert and they're louder than everybody else, and there's somebody who might be described as an introvert that people think, well, perhaps they don't have as much to add, but they might be a really deep thinker, they might be really creative, they may be a great problem solver, they may be deeply caring of people and able to kind of forge deep relationships in the team, but people aren't listening to them because somebody else's voice is dominating it. Right. So a leader worth following is somebody who actually enables everybody in their team to feel they can bring their best. We describe it in this way, that every voice around the table is truly heard, valued, and seen. Every voice around the table is truly heard, valued, and seen. And if every person around the table feels truly heard, valued, and seen, they will bring their best, and you're creating a culture of trust. And they'll challenge you, but they'll challenge you out of a strong relationship and out of trust. And they'll bring their best ideas, and then you get the superpowers of everybody in the room. And then that's how you become a leader worth following, because people say, I'm valued, I'm part of this, I can bring my best and be my best as part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's not an overnight thing. You don't just turn up one day and take on this role as a team leader, a manager, running a business or whatever, or even starting a business and hiring somebody, and they instantly sort of have this trust in you that actually where that leader's going, where my boss is going, I trust it's the right place, and I trust to go with them. So how do you go about building that kind of trust, I guess, that credibility?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, typically people think, well, there must be a whole bunch of skills or tools that you can use to do it. There absolutely is. And we teach those and we model those. We have over 60 leadership tools that we use with people that are simple, scalable and sustainable to use yourself and in the organization. It doesn't actually start there. It always starts with us as a leader. And the question is, what's it like to be the other side of me? Yeah. What's it like if I look in the mirror? What are other people experiencing of me as their leader? Because often what I've done over the years is, if people haven't been performing or bringing their best, guess who I've blamed?
Well, yeah.
Them, right? I've just assumed that they're not up to it. They're not competent enough. They're not confident enough. When actually I have to think about, who am I and what's it like to be on the other side of me? Am I actually, as a leader, creating the environment and the culture to enable them to be their best, rather than assuming that they're not good enough? And then my role is to develop them and unlock their potential and their competency to be the best that they can be. So I can't blame them if they're not performing, if I'm not investing in them. Yeah. But go back a stage, it starts with me. And I missed this, Holly, for years. So, my background was I joined Black & Decker. I played my second job outside of university, joined on the graduate program, and, it was in a sales role and marketing roles. And every 18 months, we got promoted. If someone would leave the organization, we'd get promoted. And so I found myself very young as a director, running Black & Decker for UK and Ireland as commercial director, managing director. And that sounds, on the face of it, impressive. Yeah. But to be honest, we had a lot of people leave. And it was cheaper to hire me and promote me than to get someone externally. So I kind of got promoted beyond my level of competency quite quickly. Yeah. And they gave us loads of great training on leadership. But when you go away on a workshop and sometimes you take a couple of golden nuggets away, but you've been out of the business for 3 days and you come back and now you've got 3 days more emails, 3 days more work, 3 days more problems, and the last thing you feel like doing is implementing what you've just learned on the workshop because you're fighting fires. That was my story. But what I never learned was to be self-aware. So I never really realized who I was and who I was at my best, but also where my areas that aren't so strong are. And so what I would say is that good leadership starts, and I wish I'd learned it 15 years earlier than I did. And good leadership starts with going, okay, who am I at my best? In other words, you've got to know yourself to lead yourself.
Yeah, and that's quite, being that self-aware as a leader, that's quite a brave place to be, because it's sort of a space of vulnerability, isn't it? Because you're leaving yourself quite open, because you are almost like really looking in yourself to almost deliberately find those faults and that weakness. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there's two sides to it. We always start by saying to people, what are your strengths and your superpowers?
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. If I said to you, if you took a pen, are you right-handed, Holly?
Yeah.
If you were to sign your name with your right hand, say 10 times in a row, I'm guessing you could sign it and make it look exactly the same 10 times.
Yeah,
I know we don't do it as much.
People are always asking for my autograph. I do it.
There we go. That's what it is. You see, those famous autographs. So right-handed, you can sign it 10 times. But if I said, take the pen in your left hand and try and sign your name, could you do it?
Oh, it would be very awkward looking and very uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah, but if you kept doing it, you kept practicing it, you get to a place where you could actually do it. And leadership's a little bit like this.
Quick then, couldn't I?
Leadership is a little bit like this, because ultimately what we're doing as leaders is we want to operate from our right-handedness, or in other words, our 70% zone. We have to operate from our superpowers. So if we can spend 70% of our time operating from our strengths, we will be happier, we will have more impact, and we will be more fulfilled from what we do. Now, it's okay to operate 30% of your time with your left hand. That's what we call learned behaviors, or perhaps you could call them conscious competencies, things that we've learned to do, become better at. The problem is most of us are not like that. We're either 50-50, or perhaps even spending 60% of our time in areas that actually aren't our core gifts. Really? And only spending 40% of the time on stuff we're good in. Now, if we don't know who we are, and we don't really know what our strengths are, we're going to spend too much time in the wrong area. We won't delegate the right things to people, and we won't bring the impact to the organization that only we can bring. And, I said this to a few people recently, that, most people I meet want to be somebody else. We look at social media, we meet people that I want to be like them. I want to be like that. Well, the world doesn't need another Graham Wakeman. They need me to be the best version of myself. And I'm totally unique. And Holly, they need you to be the best version of yourself, not somebody else. So, comparison is the thief of joy. And when we compare ourselves to people, we feel bad. And actually, we end up operating out of fear and insecurity to try and become somebody. If you flip it around and you go, this is who I am. This is who I am at my best. I'm going to focus on my strengths. I'm going to work at not undermining my influence by some of the things I do accidentally that undermine my leadership influence. I'm going to work on overcoming those to help me be the best leader I can. As I do that, I get healthier. I know myself to lead myself, and then I can begin to lead other people. And that's the stage that most of us don't go through. We're accidental in our leadership, not intentional.
But also as well is how much, when you say know yourself, so you sort of see looking intrinsically at yourself and almost giving yourself feedback, how valuable is it to actually bravely kind of say to others, or even say to the team you're leading, give me some feedback, tell me what I'm good at, tell me what, how valuable is that? It almost feels like you're putting yourself in a vulnerable state as a leader, but actually that feedback's probably pretty valuable to make yourself a better leader. Yeah, absolutely. And if we don't ask for feedback, that's a real sign of insecurity. If we're insecure in ourselves and so insecure we can't ask for feedback, then guess what? We're going to lead as an insecure leader and create insecure teams.
and everyone's going to be competing and trying to prove themselves because it's not authentic. But when you do what you've just suggested, you say, hey, would you give me some feedback? What is it that I do that really helps you as a leader? What is it I do that's healthy for the team and the organization? Where would you say my strengths are? But equally, what are some of the things I do that make it hard for you? What are some of the things I do that actually make your job tougher than it should be? And you have to create a culture for this, because the first time you do it, people don't give you any answers, because they're like, there might be some consequences if I say what I really think. Yeah. So you have to actually train people by creating safe spaces, but also being honest about yourself. A little bit of self-disclosure actually releases permission for people to give feedback. So I'll give you an example. I thought, going back a number of years, that I was a really, I had an open door policy. I was an open leader. And so I asked one of my team, I said, this was at Black & Decker. I said, look, could you tell me, is there anything I do that really makes it harder for you as one of my teams? As a senior team, this is a director level report. Is there anything I do that makes it harder for you? And the first time I asked them, they said, no, I love working with you. Well, I then heard from somebody else something they'd said to them when I asked that person for feedback. They said, well, I'm okay. But this other lady who works for you, she really struggles with the fact that you always change the plan. I said, what do you mean I changed the plan? Why didn't she tell me that? She said there was no problems. And what it was that we would have a team meeting and we would agree an action. And this particular lady would immediately go away and work on executing the agreed action. Right. She was what we call a J within the Myers-Briggs personality. So she's a doer, an action person, likes to prepare a long time in front, make sure that they're very good at systems and processes and policies, and somebody who wants to finish well ahead of the deadline. So she's working on it from the moment she leaves the meeting. I go away and I'm a creative problem solver. So I'm thinking, I know we've made an agreement, but there might be a better way to do this. Right. There might be a way that's more profitable, faster, more innovative, hasn't been done before. And as the deadline approaches for the project, I'm forced to make a decision. Do I go with the decision we'd already made, or do I come up with a better one? Mm-hmm. So I'd call the team together and say, I think there's a better way to do this. We talk it through, everybody would agree. But this lady, she'd already spent 2 weeks working on that project.
Oh, wow.
And now I've just changed the decision. Yeah. But she never told me in all those years how much that upset her. It caused her to work late in the evenings. It caused her to miss time with her family. It was affecting her health. But she never told me because she didn't think I would listen. And so that's what I mean, is you can think you're leading well and have no idea what it's like to be on the other side of you. So I had to change, as a result of that feedback, the way I worked with this lady. And we now, in our teams now, we use something called provisional plan promise. Very simple tool. If we make an agreement in a meeting, the team will say, is that provisional? In other words, is it likely to change? Is it a plan that we can go and start working on? Or is it a promise, a drop dead? This is going to happen. We're not moving on it. And just that simple language gives everybody permission to know how much time, how much effort, and the timing of doing it. Very simple to solve, but without feedback, frustration, culture begins to change, a little bit of toxicity, a little bit of gossip, back chat, unhealthy culture, without any awareness from me that I was doing that.
And I guess that's just that it always goes back to that aligning of expectations, and also there's an assumption, is there? Because if you in your head, you're assuming that everyone is thinking the same as you, but actually you've not openly aligned that with them. They're assuming you're thinking the same way as them. And and neither one of you has gone out to sort of mislead the other, but you just haven't actually made it clear of what's going on inside your head.
Yeah. And, this is what happens in all relationships, not just the workplace, and I think back to my own marriage, and, we have a great marriage now, but going back 20 years, it was awful. It was really tough and almost fell apart. And a lot of it was down to me because I didn't understand my wife and the way that she thought, the way she approached, her personality. We were very, very different. As we began to understand each other, we realized that we've got different strengths. Yeah. And when they synergize, it's amazing. But if we don't see it, there's conflict. Yeah. Because it's exactly the same in the workplace. It was never intentional. We never intentionally wanted to fall out, but it begins to creep over time, right? Because of our communication.
And do you know what? That's the most amazing thing, actually, because when we talk leadership, and we started this conversation thinking and talking from a professional capacity,
Yeah.
and but leadership in itself is it's communication. It's how you fit in a team. It's how you give and receive feedback.
Yeah.
And if you actually think about that in the wider life, you touched on marriage, but I don't know, sports teams, parenting. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Actually, how valuable in life is actually being an effective leader? Do you know what I mean? Not just in a professional capacity.
Yeah, because if it comes back to influence and unlocking potential, I use the word liberating. You want to liberate people, unlock them to be the best they can be. So when you think about our kids and you say, okay, who is this daughter? Who is this son? Who is this child? Who are they at their very best? What's their personality? What are their skills? What are they great at? What's their 70%?
Yeah.
And then you invest in them to help them be the best they can be, to be confident in who they are, secure in their identity. So we've got 3 daughters. And if I look at them and I look at their friends, what's going on in their generation is a complete insecurity.
Oh my goodness.
So they are insecure about who they are. They're insecure about what they look like, and they're insecure about their future. And from that comes anxiety and depression, all the stuff that we don't want our kids to go through, because they're looking at other people around them saying, I want to be like that. And what I want for our kids is I want them to go, this is who I am. I want to be like me, the best version of me.
Oh my goodness.
And I know what my strengths are. And then as a parent, what we're doing is the same as we do in the workplace. We are calibrating support and challenge, high support and high challenge. You need both to liberate somebody.
Yeah.
So support is encouraging them, championing them, speaking life over them, working with them, coming alongside them, helping them with things. That's support. The other side is challenge. And challenge is stretching them, giving them responsibility, challenging them over behaviors that don't fit with who they are at their best. And say, no, that's not who you are. Don't do that. You're undermining your influence with your friends or with your parents or your peers. Don't do that. The best version of you doesn't do that. And when you calibrate that support and challenge, you're liberating them to be the best they can be. And then they grow up secure and confident, but they stay humble.
Yeah.
Because they don't believe they're better than other people. They just believe they're the best version of themselves. And then they can help the people around them become the best version of themselves. And it's the same in our workplace, in leadership. If we can calibrate support and challenge to unlock people, then we can liberate them, but we do it through a place of being secure ourselves, confident in who we are and the gifts that we have, but humble because we recognize that other people are better than us at lots of other things. And the GiANT piece I talked about, I'm a partner at GiANT London. GiANT actually has a tiny little I in the middle of the word giant. So we're really about building big people who are secure, confident, but with a little I. In other words, they are secure, but they're humble, who build giants around them. And so that's what we're trying to do with our kids. And it's sometimes harder at home than it is in the workplace.
Yeah, but it's interesting because whenever this is probably a sweeping generalization, but when you speak to teams, and we've had feedback here in a professional capacity, and I'm sure if the kids understood the term, they'd give me this feedback as well. But people hate to be managed and micromanaged.
Yes.
And so when you talk about liberating your team, it's almost, sometimes you're in that position because, you know the industry, or the job, or your time served, and you have just years more experience than the people you're leading. So occasionally it's hard to find the balance between knowing what the right answer is and telling them, and actually influencing them and helping them get to that right answer themselves. And that's both in the workplace and at home. I look at my children sometimes and I could tell them what to do every inch of their day. And essentially micromanaging them, but actually liberating your team and going, go and do what you think while I guide you and influence you in what I believe is best, but go and do it for yourself and go through those thought processes yourself.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that is the support challenge piece. And of course, each individual, whether that be a child or whether that be a team, a colleague, or someone working with you in the organization, they need a different level of support and challenge from other people in the team. And on different days, in different weeks, in different roles, in different seasons, the calibration of support and challenge will look different. But the question you're always asking yourself as a leader is, what does this person need from me to get to the next level? Yeah. Do they need more support, or do they need more challenge? Now, the challenge, if you like, with this is that we tend to have a preference ourselves for one or the other, right? So some of us love supporting people, listening, chatting with them, encouraging them, connecting them. And other personalities really just want to stretch people and challenge them and push them harder and delegate to them. So we have to overcome our own tendencies to balance those two out, because it isn't about what's best for me. It's about, am I fighting for the highest possible good of those that I lead and love? That's the question. Am I fighting for the highest possible good of those that I lead and love, whether that be at work or at home? Do I want the best for them? And if I do, I've got to know myself to lead myself, play to my strengths, but overcome my tendencies so that I calibrate support and challenge for them to help them be liberated to be the best version of themselves. Now, when you do that for somebody, the trust level begins to increase. So right back to your earlier question, how do you gain that kind of trust? Well, when people see that you're truly for them, not just for yourself, things begin to change. And again, if I look back at my career, a lot of the time I was for myself. Not all the time. I loved people and I was good with people, but it was, can I get the next role? Can I get a pay increase? Can we hit our sales targets? Am I going to look good? Now, those things are important, right? But actually what happens is when you begin to become for others and work with them to support and challenge them, your performance improves, their performance improves, and the very things that you wanted, higher team performance, higher profitability, better sales revenue, lower costs, higher team performance, better productivity, they all come as a byproduct of a high performing team. So it feels counterintuitive, but as soon as we start to unlock people, that's what happens. And then you create this culture of high trust, where there's a place where people can be truthful, but it's also a place of high talent, because the trust and the truth create the platform for the talent to flourish and grow. Most of us do it the other way around. We want high talent, and when the talent is good, we'll trust you. And if we trust you, we'll tell you the truth. It's just the other way around that it tends to actually work in principle.
And I think if you've not known that before, that feels, as a leader, that feels quite a leap of faith, doesn't it?
Yeah. It does feel like a leap of faith. And we tend to lead according to how we've seen others lead. Both in our families, our upbringing, but also in our leaders from our businesses and organizations we've been involved in. And, and if I said to you, could you think of someone who you've worked for that you really loved working for? And can you think of somebody that you never want to work for again? No names, please. But if I asked you that,
I'm just about to tell you as well. No.
Everybody, our listeners now will be immediately imagining the faces of the leaders they love and the leaders they never want to see again. But actually, we learn as much from both. But what I don't want to do is to position my leadership out of a reaction to bad leadership. I want to position my leadership out of what is truly healthy, not out of a fear of getting it wrong or a fear of becoming like someone who I used to be led by. I want to lead from the place of being the best version of me. And that means, again, I've got to know who I am, but I've got to work at overcoming tendencies to undermine my influence.
Yeah, I love that. And also, what I love, and I've thought about this because I was listening to it on a podcast the other week, is that you don't even have to have the job title to be a leader. You could join. No. You can lead people from day one in a job, not necessarily officially by having the authority to do so, but just by, giving the right personality at work, contributing to the culture. People will naturally follow the people that they want to be influenced by. So it doesn't always come with years of experience of knowing the answers to the ins and outs of the job, does it?
No, it doesn't. And of course, in today's business culture, with more hybrid working, with more cross-functional teams, with all matrix management organizational styles, actually being able to influence at every level of the organization, regardless of title and role, is actually a superpower in its own right.
Oh my God,
and actually, I think when we do that, you are far more likely to be promoted and get more influence, because people will be drawn to leaders worth following.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that if you give a bit in your leadership and take that leap of faith, naturally it's human nature, I mean, for the majority of people, that if they're being given a little bit, whether that's in freedom, in trust, in credibility, in praise, they tend to give something back. It's human nature, isn't it? It's that give and take. And if you're just taking from your team all the time and driving them, I guess in the short term productivity would spike, but in the long term they're less likely to go that extra mile when you really need them to, in the longevity of your team.
Yes, absolutely. That's what happens. So, ultimately, if you keep driving, what you're doing is creating a dominating culture, or a culture of fear. It's high challenge, low support. And what that typically does is people will perform out of fear for a period of time, but they are likely to burn out. And at some point in time, they are likely to leave. So you get poor retention. You get all the costs associated with retention and recruitment, which you'll obviously know well. But you get all of that goes with that as well. Whereas if you can create a culture of liberation, people will put the extra mile in. They will do the stuff that they wouldn't normally do. They'll share the ideas they would never normally share, the innovation. They'll support each other. You lose some of the toxicity. The way that in so many businesses there's a culture of kind of gossip and chat. That stuff. So rather than they hear something, that rather than going to the source and saying, look, I've heard this, is this true? What they do is they pass it on to somebody else.
Change it a little bit as well.
Right. And before you know it, it's spread around, and what was true is no longer true. People are now believing things, wasting time. And very simply, we say to people, well, actually, why don't you go back to the source, become a firewall rather than a conduit? In other words, when I hear gossip or I hear something about somebody, I'm going to become a firewall to it. I'm not going to pass it on. I'm not going to allow the virus to spread. I'm going to be a firewall rather than a conduit. And the people who are conduits are the people who pass it on and multiply it. Now, that alone, as a practice, as a leader, of being a firewall as a leader, means that you begin to change the culture and the way people behave in the organization. And it's really shifted the culture when the people who are newer in the organization, or perhaps lower, in the way we might describe roles and titles, they begin to say to somebody else, that's not how we behave here. We don't talk about people behind their back. Then it's ingrained in the culture, and then your culture is getting healthier. So we have a massive part to play as leaders in modeling culture. We love to put values up on the wall and say, these are our 6, 7, 8, 10 values. But actually, what everyone in the organization is doing, they're looking at you and me and saying, do you live those values? And if you don't, they're absolutely worthless. Do you live them? And if we live them and model them and multiply them through the organization, people begin to go, this is real, it's authentic. I trust these people. I will give everything to them, and for this organization, I'll give my best because I'm valued. And that's when you get a really exciting company culture.
Yeah. And I think maybe some of that comes down to transparency as a leader. So instead of making a decision, saying this is the decision, and communicating it behind closed doors, to perhaps stop the any gossip or any sort of hearsay at source, is you make a business change decision. You stand there and you tell the people one-to-one, or at face-to-face, the decision, but also let them in a little bit behind the scenes of how you got to that decision, your reasoning behind it, and where you want, rather than just assuming they know, or rather just assuming that, well, it must be the right decision because my leaders told me this. Actually saying, this is a decision, this is why I've had to take this decision, this is where I hope this decision will take us. Have you got any questions? Do you want to challenge that? Do you know what I mean? So it's that open yourself out and transparency, and making yourself a real person. I mean, I can only speak on my experience here. We have a leader who, whenever we have a big decision, will take time to go round the different offices within the building and sit there and face that decision, own that decision, and go,
Right.
does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
And when they walk out the door, it's kind of all the questions are answered. So there's no sort of in between the lines reading or gossiping or anything. And,
Yes.
so it's that raising that level of transparency, isn't it?
Really powerful, right? And the reason a lot of leaders don't do that is it takes longer. It feels like it's taking longer. It feels risky. Transparency means you're opening yourself up, but actually what he's doing long term is building a culture of trust, building a culture of empowerment, and taking the time to do it. And it's always worth the investment of time. Now, there is, of course, appropriate disclosure levels. We have to know what to disclose, when to disclose it, and who to disclose it to. And there's wisdom in knowing what those 3 levels of disclosure should be. So there are some situations where we can't tell people exactly what's going on or what's going on behind it, but people understand that. So as long as we have some level of authenticity and we're providing feedback, the communication is good. We talk about there's 5 key dynamics of high performing teams. And if you imagine a water wheel, like a water mill, and the water comes in at the top, once the water hits the top of the water mill, it begins to turn. Now, it doesn't take much more water to keep it turning because you've got momentum in it. But the top of the water wheel, it says communication.
Right.
And if you get good communication in a business, I don't just mean great presentation skills. I mean knowing who you are and knowing who each person in the team is. And then making sure that everybody has a voice and that we're communicating effectively between us and getting all the superpowers to come to the table and bring their experience and their voice. That's good communication. The second part of the water wheel is trusted relationships. So now you've got communication flowing, people begin to trust each other and trust grows. Now it doesn't take much water to turn the wheel because the trusted relationships then turn the wheel. That improves alignment in the organization to strategy, to vision, to tactics. And that alignment improves the execution of the strategic plan. And as we see the execution improve, our capacity and productivity goes up. Now, most organizations want to focus, guess what? On capacity, execution, and alignment. But the thing that gets the water wheel moving or the business moving or the performance moving is always communication and trusted relationships. And they are the most impactful thing, the most powerful thing, but often the hardest thing to work on to change the culture of a team or an organization. Because it starts with us, then into our leadership team, and then out into the organization. And that sounds as though that's what's happening in your organization, which is brilliant.
Yeah. And do you know what? I love talking about this. And I it's almost one thing understanding it and going, oh my goodness, yeah, Graham, you're absolutely right. And sitting here and thinking you're right. And going out into your organization or wherever you are and actually doing it. That's the difference, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Or making that first step to go, actually, the behaviors or the habits that I've fallen into, it's not just about sitting here and going, you're absolutely right, I know what I need to do, but it's actually going out there and challenging your behaviors that you've fallen into the habit of doing and changing them. Yeah.
And that's the same in every part of life. It's what we call the knowing doing gap. It's a lot of things I know I should do. And so if you take exercise or food or any of those things, you can go, I know, people don't need to be told that they know they need to exercise, they need to eat better, they need to get regular sleep, get off social media, don't look at screens 2 minutes before bed, all that. We know that, most of us. But the gap between knowing and doing is actually what actually changes us and therefore changes the team and changes the culture. Now, most of us get too busy working in the business as leaders to really work on ourselves or on the business. In other words, what we have to do is recognize that, I think it was Peter Drucker that said that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I love that. It's only kind of partially true because actually, creating healthy culture is strategy. So I would say creating a healthy culture in yourself, so becoming as healthy as you can as a leader, not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually, becoming the best person you can be as a leader, and then flowing that into your team and creating a healthy culture. That is the number one strategy for a high performing organization. Now, the problem is that doesn't sound like the priority, because the tyranny of the urgent always eats up the really important stuff. So the firefighting, the pressure on numbers, people resigning, recruitment, train, all that stuff. But as leaders, we have to go, hang on a second, what is my role? If I'm a senior leader, my role is to create the culture of this organization and to liberate the people to be the best they can be. It starts with me. Am I putting time aside to close the knowing doing gap? Do I know who I am? Am I putting in place the things I need to do, the tools I need to put in place to overcome my tendencies? Am I becoming a better version of me? If the answer is yes, then what you'll find is you begin to delegate better. You begin to communicate better. You begin to create trusted relationships. You have less toxicity. You have less fires to fight, and you're able to grow the business and grow the team. But as you said, it requires us being really deliberate about closing that knowing doing gap. And the cost of it, of not doing it, is humongous. Absolutely humongous. When you actually look at the lost opportunity in our businesses of both sales, revenue, and profit, but also the costs of not doing it around unhealthy culture, retention, recruitment, issues, the time it takes, low productivity, poor execution. Those things are worth, in most businesses, millions and millions of pounds. And so doing something about it is a game changer, absolute game changer.
It really is. And I mean, I could talk about it all day, Graham. I honestly could. I absolutely adore our conversation. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your sort of wisdom with us on leadership.
It was a pleasure. It's lovely to chat to you again, Holly. I love what you're doing. I love your podcast. I keep an eye out all the time on LinkedIn for the things that you post, and very enviously look at some of those boats that you put pictures up of. That's great. So thank you so much for having me on the show today. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, let's chat again soon. Honestly, it's so useful for everyone, I'm sure.
It would be great. Yeah, thanks,
awesome.
Holly.
Thank you so much, Graham.
I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, then it would be awesome if you could leave a rating or a review. Don't forget to subscribe so you can listen to us again. See you soon.